Hey friends, before we get started, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It would help the video out a lot, and it's an easy thing for you to do but means a lot to us. Thanks in advance.
The rumors about the new River residential complex started going around back when there were still old buildings on the site, and the project hadn't even been signed off yet. They were building another high-rise with barely any parking on the outskirts, not far from where I lived, near the brick factory. Getting here from the city at the end of the day was already tough because there were hardly any minibuses, and now it's even worse. The idea of 1,000 new apartments popping up nearby freaked out the locals. Just a couple of months later, a local paper ran an article about cursed German burial sites under the old houses. It turned out the authors were two middle-aged ladies who clearly hinted that the construction would turn into a total nightmare. But on the day the article came out, the project got the green light, and soon enough, construction barriers started going up in the neighborhood. The scandals kept rolling throughout the build, mostly driven by protests from the old ladies. The adults were all stressing out about getting mortgages to snag an apartment before the next crisis hit. But my buddies and I saw the project picture with that big area full of outdoor workout equipment, and we got super excited, laughing at all the grumpy old ladies. By the time we hit 7th grade, the construction was done, and some of my classmates moved into new places, including my best friend, Ilyuka. His yard became our go-to spot for hanging out. We could rollerblade and skate on the smooth pavement. Soon, the residents started to chase us away on our bikes. A bunch of the guys moved to the other end of the neighborhood, where a new sports complex was opening up, with a playground just like the one at Liuka's place. But the most dedicated ones stuck around at our favorite spot. It was even better in a small group. After school, we'd change and rush over to Ilyuka's by the fence where the woods started to burn leaves and paper in the makeshift grill and listen to scary stories. Of course, we soaked up all the gossip and rumors about the new apartment complex. Everyone was really into it. It's really cozy and fun here. But when it gets dark, it suddenly feels all mysterious and creepy. That's when the monsters start coming out. Would freak out about zombies and imagine how we'd deal with one if it jumped out from around the corner. Sometimes the guys would bring friends from other classes and schools, and we'd tell the same story over and over again, sometimes mixing things up or intentionally changing details. To this day, I remember a few of those stories. I even wrote some down for the future because I knew they'd come in handy. We called the first story. Back in the day, everyone was talking about her, and we were always surprised if a new acquaintance hadn't heard anything. The 2-story buildings were still boarded up, just waiting to be torn down, and nobody really kept an eye on them, even though the area was fenced off. So it's no wonder that a local group of high schoolers quickly spotted a good spot to hang out. One night, they pried off some boards from a window that faced the woods and climbed inside. They found themselves in a dark hallway and sneaked into an empty apartment on the 2nd floor, cranking up some trendy music. Back in the day, they lit some candles around a Coke can, started drinking and smoking, and after a couple of hours, they suddenly heard a clear cough, like someone had caught a whiff of cigarette smoke and started coughing. The 4 guys were sitting in the same room, silent and on edge, when the sound shifted to loud, raspy breathing, the kind that whistles. 2 of the guys picked up some junk from the floor, like wooden legs, and checked out the other rooms, quickly realizing the noises weren't coming from the girl. They flat out refused to go outside. They were scared to even move, worried about getting caught in the stairwell, so they decided to lock the door since the latches were still intact. They sent the guys out to scout and figure out who was breathing so creepily. The guys realized they needed to check downstairs, but for some reason, it didn't even bother them or cross their minds that just breathing could be that loud. Shoulder to shoulder, they went through the apartments, lighting their way with a shaky flame that they liked and the dim screen of a nearly dead phone. But no matter how much they wandered around, in the abandoned rooms, they just couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. Then one guy froze, listened closely, and signaled the other to be quiet. He knelt down and pressed his ear to the wooden floor, and the breathing got louder and louder. The kid jumped up, eyes wide, saying someone was breathing underground. The other one replied, "It seems like each apartment has its own cellar," and sure enough, they found a trapdoor with a metal ring on the handle in the kitchen. After that, the story started to diverge. Some said the guys peeked in, saw something or someone, and screamed. They freaked out and ran upstairs to the girls, locked themselves in with them, broke the boards on the window, and jumped from the second floor into a pile of sand behind the house. Others claimed that the guys didn't even touch Luke, just glanced at each other and took off running. Then they figured out that the house itself seemed to be breathing, like it was facing some inevitable doom, because the next day they started tearing it down. We didn't have any good friends or older folks to clarify the details, and honestly, we didn't need to. The whole thing left us with this nice feeling of an unsolved mystery that warmed our hearts. Just that one time. We saw this guy by the kiosks who, rumor has it, was pressing his ear to the floor, but we never had the guts to go up and ask him anything. But just think of all the wild stuff we imagined about that creepy basement, from terrifying ghostly faces to the giant throat of the dying house that seemed to breathe. Then our buddy Lunchik showed up and put an end to all the chatter about him. You could go on forever about that guy. He was a real trickster, always spinning tales about how he had a special version of GTA at home where you could swim all the way. He said he had been to our town and even gone to his house, where he saw the maniac with the leather face and a ghost in a wheelchair standing on the bridge near the village. But he can't go to his house and see for himself because his parents wouldn't let him at first, and then everything just disappeared from the computer. He lent the game disc to someone and forgot about it. This guy immediately caught our attention and started claiming he knew the scary truth about my brother tearing down that house, saying there's a basement or something there. You know, it's actually pretty deep, because before, it led somewhere. But whatever, the guy saw a coffin. Can you believe it? My bro said he only saw it when it was already empty. Crazy, right? Our friend looked so pale, she was in a lower grade. So Lyochik crossed his arms and ran off, zombie style, into the deep cellar. Ilyuka squinted at him, skeptical. And I know, Lyochik snorted back at him. Probably just went to the woods or something. Lyochik lived on the 3rd floor of a new apartment complex. The more we talked, the more there were creepy stories that made it seem like little kids were living in a hellish nightmare. According to him, there was never a peaceful night in that house, and something scarier happened every time. He was convinced he could hear a soft child's cry all the time, but the parents said there were no kids living nearby. One night at 3 a.m., Leonchik pressed his ear against the wall and suddenly felt it shake, and then he heard a whisper saying,
"I've been buried alive."
Leonchik jumped but didn't freak out or tell his parents. Instead, he carefully lifted the wallpaper with a ruler along the seam. He saw the imprint of a child's hand behind them that almost immediately disappeared. Then he complained that every night he noticed a tall, skinny silhouette of a man standing still under the streetlight on the playground, with his hands visible but his head hidden. But one day, Lenchik stared at him for too long, and suddenly the guy moved and took off. The light fell on his horrifying, disfigured face, and Lenchik saw that the man's mouth was stitched shut and his eyes were all black with bloody streaks. Soon, the entrance door slammed, and half a minute later, Lenchik's apartment was filled with... Little A couldn't do anything because he was home alone, and his phone was broken. By some miracle, he managed to survive. In the darkness of the apartments, people hear a quiet whisper. It's the spirits of the dead Germans rising from the ground to find a corpse and take over. So, you have to be really careful around the dead in the complex. No one would be surprised if a body suddenly got up and walked away. That's why at funerals, they drive a knife blade straight into the heart of the deceased beforehand. The mysteries unraveled quickly for us. The classmates who lived in that complex quickly put all those crazy stories to rest and mentioned how much of a dreamer we called Lyochik, to put it mildly. We stopped taking his stories seriously for about a year. He got really upset about the nickname and wouldn't hang out with us, just riding by on his bike now and then, listening to what we were talking about. But on the first day of the new summer break, we invited him to chill in the gazebo. And that's when he told us about a secret basement, guys. I swear, he even drew a little picture on his chest with his finger. I'll tell you the truth about the invisible cross. Remember when I was joking about breathing? Well, there was a coffin in the cellar. Anyway, I joked about it, but it turned out to be scarier than I thought. Seriously, he exclaimed when we started giggling. What's going on there? I remember Ilyuka asking. He grew up fast over the year, shot up and got a deep manly voice. It really was deeper, not just rumors. Alanchik said that those mushrooms left from the old houses kind of merged together. Ilyuka shook his head and laughed, but I quickly shut him down. It was too much. Hey, it's interesting to listen to Lanchik. He went on about how if you crawl into the basement, you can find a way down into this old house with 2 floors that was somewhere over there. He pointed to the door of the 3rd entrance. So we gotta go underground and look for some stairs or a passage. Yeah, come on, he waved his hand. Ilyuka, you big liar. You don't even have a brother for sure. I swear, I couldn't stop. Lunchik was almost in tears. Let's check it out, shall we? I said. Come on, let's go, guys, just for kicks. We all glanced at each other and one girl asked, are we gonna get in trouble for this? If something happens, let's just blame it on that guy. He smirked, softened a bit, and nodded at Lenny. If he starts acting up again, we'll just leave him here. Lenny shivered and said, no way, let's stick together or I'm not going. Fine by me. Ilya broke into a grin and headed back to the gazebo. Honestly, no one wanted to go with you anyway. That's when I couldn't hold it in anymore, remembering how I stood up for that poor guy Lenny and how I had to beg. Chills ran down my spine. The thing is, something felt off about our little adventure. Lenny ran to the concierge, who was friends with his grandma, so he just waltzed into that little room on the 1st floor. I got caught up talking, and there was a tag that said, basement. So we didn't have to search for long. We waited for the guy to show up from the side of the house. Ilya kept asking questions, and I didn't know what to say then, and I still don't. It was either pity for the little liar, or some naive thirst for adventure. I imagined a complex, ancient maze system that would be super interesting to explore and even draw a map of, though I didn't really know what deep passages were down there. Soon, waving a key, Lyochik came running, happy as can be, took the lock off the door and hung it inside on the handle. Fearing we might get kicked out, he asked someone to go ahead, so I went with my girlfriend, followed by Lyoshka and a few of our other friends. We wandered around for a while, finally turning on the lights, which made things easier. Even though the place was new, the basement looked absolutely disgusting. Pipes everywhere, cramped little rooms, that musty smell, and probably a couple of dead mice stinking it up. We were just wandering around for about 30 minutes when Ilyusha couldn't take it anymore and told everyone to wait. Then he went outside, and as he explained later, it was a short walk from the back of the building to the third entrance. To get a rough idea of where to search for that damn passage down in the basement, he soon came back, counting out loud as he made his way to another little room filled with pipes and wires. Suddenly, something clicked in his memory. Right here, there was a huge dark hole. I have no idea how we ended up in these deep corridors, or how we got to this dimly lit spot behind a dark turn. Up ahead, there was a long, wide passage with arches that curved up to the ceiling, just like in a castle dungeon, and it was all made of dark brown stone. With a big brick in hand, everyone except me was zoned out. I can't even remember what we were talking about at the fork in the road. We turned right into a wide hallway. I was getting bored, so I sniffed and started talking a bit louder. My dad used to work at our brick factory in the 90s. One time, he was coming home alone through the woods after the second shift, and it was dark. He saw something hanging from a tree. He stopped, pulled out his lighter, and while he was fiddling around, he kept staring at the tree, trying to figure out what it was. Can you believe it? It turned out to be a woman who had hanged herself. My dad went up to her. I was sweating from fear. Even though it was November and the wind was howling, Dad decided to check if that lady was alive. He touched her leg, and her shoe was right at his face level since she had climbed up high. He nudged her a bit, but she didn't move. Dad was a bit freaked out because he heard a dry branch crack above him. Then, out of nowhere, this woman just dropped on him like a sack of potatoes, landing right on his shoulder. He flinched, dropped his cigarette, grabbed her with both hands, and kind of lifted her up. It was like carrying a kid. You get the picture. It stinks so bad it makes you want to throw up, but you can't just leave it. That'd be wrong, you know? So he drags her out onto the path, just a bit until the first streetlight. Then he looks at her face, and the woman opens her eyes wide and gives him this huge smile. She makes this loud sound, like ha, and Dad just freaks out, drops her, and bolts back the way he came. He glances back, and that freak is chasing after him, her face frozen in that goofy grin, eyes wide open, getting louder and louder with that ha thing. Dad's crossing himself while running, stops for a sec, and that lady is still going off. "What the hell, you idiot?" he mutters. "This is not the time. Do you get it? All right, let's go back, guys. Please, come on," begged Leona. Just a little further. No one was planning to back down, at least not the guys. We stopped again at a fork in the road. There were 3 paths. Look, Elia was surprised. We're probably already by the woods. "Hey, liar, where do these paths lead?" "What did your brother say?" I swore I wasn't lying. Leona got upset. "He didn't share anything. He doesn't even know what's going on here." We decided to go right again, trying to always turn that way so we wouldn't get lost until we figure it out. I was imagining what an awesome base we could set up here, since there's a whole network of underground tunnels. It's way better than any shack or even my own apartment. We just need to figure out how to light up those corridors. When I shared my ideas with Ilya, he immediately remembered another story. Back in the village, the guys were looking for a spot to make their own base too. They found an abandoned place, an old cow shed on a farm. The roof is mostly intact. There's just one hole in the middle, but there are all these little nooks and crannies. If we put in some effort, it could be really great. The place was nice, not far from the river. The houses were over the hill, so no one could peek. In the summer, they had everything set up nicely, and we used to go there every day. I was still little back then, so they rarely took me, but I remember it well. It was a lot of fun. In the fall, all the city folks left, and only the ginger guy, Vavon, stayed behind to hang out alone for a bit. He wanted to clean everything up for winter so it wouldn't get ruined. They had old chairs and homemade lockers there, and it'd be a shame if they got messed up. So he went back there during the day, but the weather was terrible. Clouds rolling in, wind, and rain. Soon, Van spots someone on the roof of their barn from a distance. He squints, and just like that, the guy disappears into a hole. Looks like he jumped. Now, Van's a tough guy. He could knock anyone out if needed, so he pushes on. But the closer he gets, the creepier it feels. He says his shoulders are heavy, his back is killing him, and his legs just won't move. So he stops and watches as a hunched old man comes out of the barn, holding a stick with a chain dangling from the end. He can't seem to get moving, but the old guy's coming at him, the stick thudding against the ground, chain rattling. A lightning bolt appeared in the sky, and suddenly, there was a loud bang. Van got so scared that he took off running, kicking up dust behind him. He told his grandmother, and she started crying and went to get holy water, insisting on washing Van's face at the doorstep. She warned him not to go into that barn because there's something evil living there. While they were in a group, he was too scared to show himself. But now, he's not afraid anymore. And that same night, Van heard that hunchback walking outside his window, whispering something and banging a stick with a chain. We all froze. It was really unsettling. "All right," Elia finally sighed. "I'm not going to keep you guys here. Stop scaring me. Let's just go back and come back with the papers to draw the map. You're not fooling anyone, liar. Ugh, quit with the name calling." Leona shouted, and then he suddenly fell to the floor with a squeal. His nose hit hard, blood pouring down his chin. "Shut your mouth," Ilya barked. "If you say one more thing, I swear." Something crashed ahead of us, and my heart nearly exploded from fear. We bolted back down the hallway. Ilya grabbed my sleeve and dragged me along, his flashlight swinging away from Leona, who was still sitting on the floor. I was swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. I ran, forgetting everything, gasping for breath, bumping my shoulders against the arches, stumbling. But I didn't even dare to think about stopping. I couldn't hear anything in the chase, chalked it up to my ears being blocked, but it turned out to be much worse. It was after us on a different path. We had just reached the first fork when the light from the lantern pulled our disfigured friend out of the shadows. Ilya screamed, and I almost choked on the lump in my throat. Then, in that pale glow, a long, clawed figure appeared. The paw, the color of tree bark, looked emaciated despite its large size. It was like its owner had been starving for ages. Ilyuka pulled out his phone and for a moment showed us the most horrifying sight imaginable. It was unbelievably huge, with an elongated body stretching far into the dark hallway. The part close to us resembled a giant person, with a face that looked like a wooden mask, dark, bottomless eye sockets, and below that, disgusting, drooping appendages that looked like tangled roots. It breathed hoarsely and with a whistle. We felt her rotten breath somewhere deep in the underground tunnel. Ilyuka desperately glanced back, then turned the flashlight to the side and, not letting go of me, dashed towards the exit. Suddenly, it felt like we fell into a burnt clearing in a mental forest. Then there was the basement with pipes and wires, creaky steps, a door that squeaked, and blinding rays of sunlight. Ilyuka was crying, howling in his prose-like voice, while I sat there shaking, barely understanding what was happening around us. How many years had passed, and I still couldn't remember how we ended up in that cursed deep basement. Later on, both Ilyuka and I were part of that. At our parents' place, the investigators showed up because this is serious. Kids have gone missing, and they might even be dead. The two who survived are spouting total nonsense about some labyrinth in that little room, where we thought there would be a way down. There was a small opening, sure, but it was bricked up. On the other side, there were no corridors, just a tiny room, like 2 by 2 meters. Looks like that was the weird continuation of the old cellar that Lienchik's brother mentioned. Ever since then, everything's gone sideways. Side-eye looks, gossip, and new rumors everywhere. They made my parents scoop me up and take me far away from our neighborhood and then the city. I tried desperately to find even a few memories. I worked with psychologists, went to hypnosis sessions, but it was all in vain. After I finished college and made a bit of money, I secretly returned to my hometown for a couple of weeks. Over the years, I had gained 2 more houses. I walked around there shyly, glancing at the basement door. The newcomers seemed a bit off at first, but soon they shared a story about how a few kids broke into the basement, and they disappeared. But honestly, no one takes those kinds of stories seriously anymore. These guys really believe it's all just made up for disobedient kids. I said my goodbyes and left, not even daring to approach the closed basement door. That's the whole story. I thought my memories would come back if I described those events in detail. But sadly, it's a bust again. The only thing I have left from that incident, aside from the deep psychological trauma, is the haunting knowledge that what we saw was just a small part of something unimaginable. That ancient creature. All these hallways aren't just mazes. They're its hiding place. It scares me to even think about what's at the center of this system. I have no idea how Ilya's life turned out. People have said a lot, but I try to ignore the gossip now. Who knows? It might lead me back to that basement again.